Hello, Bob Simmons here, Dwarf 3 user for the past 1 year, since June of 2025. Even before I got my Dwarf, I was looking forward to editing files on my own, as I had seen Quiv the Lazy Geek and Deep Space Astro and several other YouTubers doing some amazing things beyond what you can get from Stellar Studio. Now, Stellar Studio does give you a pretty good result, and they've even gotten better lately at doing that, but it doesn't allow you a lot of control over what you're doing. So I think this is definitely the way to go once you get comfortable with it. But what I did for starters is I took Stellar Studio results, the resulting fit file, which is a linear high resolution file. I take that file and use that in Siril as if I stacked it myself. Because in Siril, you can stack all the individual files and create your final fit, the same as it happens in the Dwarf. But for now, we're just going to take the already stacked file that you may have gotten out of Stellar Studio, and we're going to remove the stars and edit the starless portion, and then put it all back together and see what we end up with. For now, I'm going to assume that you already have Siril and Starnet installed. If you do not, I've got a video mentioned in the description that comes from this lovely gentleman, Herman Desmet, Belgian astrophotographer. He installs it on a Mac, but it's actually he has a few issues with the Mac because there's a few things different about the way the Mac OS works, but he gets into those details, but it's very similar in Windows, and I didn't have any of the issues that he had in this video. But anyway, this clearly explains how to get it installed and get Starnet up and running within Siril. And once you're at that point, then you're ready to continue on with what we're going to do here today. Siril can be found here, siril.org. They have a downloads page. They have it for Windows. They have it for Mac. They have it for Linux. So whatever you have, they're going to get you up and running. And Starnet can be found here at starnetastro.com. Select Starnet and select your operating system, Windows, Mac, whatever. And you're going to want the command line, because there's a CLI is command line interface. So this is what you're going to be looking for, because that's what Siril uses. It's a scripting language, so it calls out to Starnet and asks it to do some work for it. So it uses this command line interface version of Starnet to work properly. That being said, let's jump right into Siril. The first thing you need to do in Siril is up at the top, it tells you what your home directory is, so that when it's creating a bunch of files, you want it all to end up in one spot and not have random folders and processing directories that Siril creates while it's doing its stacks and processes. You don't want that all over your system, so you first tell it where you want it to be. So in this case, I'll go to home. I'm going to go to my desktop, pick my Jelly directory, and now you'll see up top here it mentions that this is now our home directory. Then I say open, and I actually open this. So this is the kind of file that you would get, a FIT file. Flexible Image Transport System, I believe, is what FITS stands for. You get this file from the Dwarf. You can pull it right out of... every time you do a stack, it auto-stacks and creates a resulting fit file like this right in the Dwarf directory. And then when you do Stellar Studio, it takes that fit, processes it, and then gives you the option of a JPEG, a PNG, or a fit. So if you've pre-process it with Stellar Studio, ask for the fit version, and I believe it sends you a link, and you can then download that link to your computer, and you'll have this file. So whichever way you want to go about it, get yourself a fit file like this, set your home directory, open the fit file. Now we've opened it, and it doesn't really look like much. And the reason for that is that fit file is like a raw format that high-end cameras use. All the data is linear, meaning that it's all kind of piled to one end. It's like taking a bucket and dumping all your data into it. It just goes to the bottom of the bucket. So it doesn't really look like anything until we do something what's called a stretch. And that's where you take it from, where it's all piled up at one end, the dark end of the spectrum, and you stretch it out so that all the light pixels are across the full visual light spectrum, at least our visual light spectrum. And we'll do that easily down here with something called auto stretch. This doesn't really do anything. It's just giving us a view of how the data will look once we actually stretch it. And we'll do that later. So here's auto stretch. And right off the bat, I can see that a bit of the jellyfish, and I can also see some noise over here. So stacking, especially when you stack across multiple days, the Earth, even though I'm in EQ mode and you're trying to keep everything just nice, you know, if you stacked it all in one night and had one full winter's 8-hour night, you wouldn't have a lot of this. You'd have a nice clean image. But when you stack several nights, sometimes you lose a little bit around the edges because the Earth has shifted since the last time you took an image. So what I'm going to do is crop out this bit here. Let me come down to here and over to here. Nice thing about the crop tool is you can also tweak it after the fact, so you can grab these edges. Make sure that you're inside of any noise. You're not going to want it in your final image, so you might as well take it out here and have less time for your computer to waste processing stuff you're going to throw away. You right click, once you've drawn your rectangle, right click, go to crop, and I'm going to select crop. Now it's gone. Also, sometimes your image will look green or will have some funny cast colors to it. Sometimes it's because it's linked. You can click this button down here and link or unlink, and you see it looks a little different. Now, the very first thing you want to do after that is you want to plate solve your image. And plate solving is where it maps out what stars are in your image so that all the processes know what part of the sky you're looking at. So you come up to Tools, Astronomy, Astrometry, Image Plate Solver. Now here, you can type in and look up the item, and it will give you some details, and then you can say, okay. But in many cases, it knows what it's looking at anyway, so you can just go straight to okay. The one thing you do want to check, though, I often use this flip image if needed, because sometimes the way that we're the mirroring inside of the scope, things will be flipped vertically and things will be upside down. So I leave that on and I click OK. Yes, and in this case it did flip it. So now we can go to our color calibration. There's a few options in here, but spectrophotometric is the highest level of color calibration. And it goes out to a database and figures out, based on your sensor, what filters you used, and checks it against the Gaia star catalog and figures out what colors should be in this piece of the sky. Click OK. Over here it's checking, it's reached out to Gaia, and in a few seconds it'll come back, and now it has done it. Plots out graphs of where the colors are. We can just close that. Very next thing we want to do is remove some background. So I come over here, go to Python scripts, processing. There's a few different ways of doing that, but we'll come down and use our Graxpert. Don't be alarmed. This says Graxpert AI. It's not an AI that adds anything. It's an AI in terms of, it's an intelligence that's been trained to know the difference between background noise and legitimate image data. So it's just better at doing that over and over and over again. So it's been trained to do that and that only. It doesn't put things on there. It doesn't add stars that don't exist. Those are the kind of things that you get from generative AI. That is not what this is. So I click apply. Done. As quick as that. And you may have noticed that it changed the image a little bit. You can also undo things. So if I come up here, you see undo, Graxpert comes on. Notice that it's a bit washed out down here around the jelly part. If I go forward again, redo it, it's more even. So the background is more even all across the image, and that's what background extraction is doing for us. Now I'm not going to get into, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can do, and maybe in another video we'll get into that. But there's things you can do here. There's the Verilux suite, which does a bunch of things. We'll use one or two of those items maybe. Sycon is actually a denoiser and a starless. I used their starless, but I paid money for that. For a while there, their starless was better than Starnet, but right now there's an issue because, as with many processes today, there's 3 or 4 processes drawing upon each other, and one of the ones that they use, somebody changed something in their program that has thrown a wrench in the Sycon starless process. So for the moment, my Sycon starless is not doing as good a job as Starnet. So we'll stick with Starnet today. What I'll do is I'll come over here to image processing, star processing, star removal. We'll leave this option pre-stretch linear because we are, even though it says auto stretch, again, that's just our view. This is unstretched. This is a linear piece of data. We have not actually stretched it. We're just seeing what it would look like if it was stretched back here. So we need to tell Starnet, yes, we have not stretched our image, so please pre-stretch it before it runs its process. And star mask is what we want because star mask is actually the stars only version of this image. So we will pull the stars out, have that as a separate file, and we'll have the nebulosity without the stars as a separate file. So I click OK and let it go. And I'll cut the video for a second. It doesn't take that long, but save you waiting. Okay, there we are. Starnet has removed our stars. As you can see, we've got some noise back here. If you use the mouse wheel, you can zoom in. And this is quite common in astrophotos. You get this mottled blue, green, red kind of background noise. If you press Control-0, it'll bring it back and center it. So here, what I will do, as I said, there's a bunch of different denoisers. You could run this SCU denoise if you want. Graxpert has a denoiser. There's a denoising cosmic clarity, but again, that's the thing, SETI Astro, there's some other programs you have to set up and get working. But I am going to run my Sycon Prism, which is, again, I paid $40 Canadian, I guess 30 US or something, for their paid version. But I find this works very well. This one does take a minute or two, so I'll probably save you from watching all of this as well. I'll just get it started. This is Prism Deep. You can also set up Prism as well. You can go into the Get Scripts, add the Sycon Prism script, and it will allow you to bring up this interface. And Prism Mini is a free version. So without any money, you can get a fairly good denoise using Prism Mini. But I paid the extra money and got Prism Deep. I generally leave it as defaults, but you can change the tile size. If for some reason you see there's some kind of an issue with how it's running, you can fiddle around with some of these parameters. But I find 99% of the time I leave it just like it is. I just click denoise. So again, it's going to take a couple of minutes to step one by one. You'll see up at the top here, it's, if you can pick it out in YouTube. Oh yeah, right there, just cleared that a little bit. So tile by tile, it's going to go across the whole image and remove a bunch of that color noise that we were looking at earlier. So we'll just wait till this finishes and we'll come back and carry on from there. Okay, Prism has done its job. I left the interface on screen for a moment here so you can see the difference, maybe. But you can see there's before, a lot of graininess. Hard to see any edges here in the jelly. And as we roll this back, you can see that it did remove a lot of that junk that we don't want. So we'll say okay. Now back here it looks kind of ugly, but that's because the auto stretch view took into account all the noise that used to be there. So it's actually stretching the image a little too much. Rich over at D-Space Astro came up with a fix for that. I guess Siril will eventually fix it and maybe give some parameters to auto stretch so you can do away with this issue. But for now, Rich created this utility called auto stretch preview. So I can dial down some of what's going on there and get a little cleaner looking image. So that's kind of what we're looking at now, with some of the noise removed. So it's much better than we started with for sure. Right now I'm going to drop this to linear because we don't really need to see it at this point. Okay, now we're going to want to stretch our image. There's a few different ways to do it. There's manually stretching over here, which is several other videos probably, because there's a lot involved in that. But simpler than that, you can come in here and either go to processing, statistical stretch, which is a built-in one in the Siril world, but also Virolux is a gentleman in Italy who created a whole bunch of really cool Siril products, add-ons. He has one here called hypermetric stretch, which is very popular these days. It's free, by the way. Generally, I stick with what he has in here by default, but you're going to want to pick your sensor. And in the case of the Dwarf 3, we use the Starvis 2 678. So come into this drop down, locate the sensor that you have, click Auto Calc, move that slider over, and then we can just preview without doing anything. That looks pretty good. If you found it was too washed out, you could lower the background and make it darker. Auto Calc again, live preview. Now it's a darker image. I think up around 10 or 12 is where he is by default. We'll call it 11. There we go. So we'll close that and say yes. Process. Now it's been done, and close that window. So now we have a stretched image. We no longer need auto stretch. If we save this, we could save as a JPEG and people would see it as this. But before you stretch it, if you saved it, they would see nothing. They would see that dark screen or maybe a few stars. But now that it's been stretched, this can now be saved in multiple formats and viewed by anyone. So right now we want it to be viewed by Affinity Photo so we can kind of clean up this starless portion. So up here next to save, there's a down arrow that's a save as. I'm going to save as a PNG because that's a good a good format for Affinity. You can also use TIFF if you want it. I like PNG. Okay, this is Affinity Photo 2, but it's a similar thing in Affinity, which has now been bought out by Canva. Or you can also use Photoshop as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this part of Affinity Photo, which is Develop Persona, they call it. And that gives me access to raw photo editing tools, like you might have seen in Photoshop or some of those other programs, even some of the programs on your phone. This is the raw editing toolkit. So I'm going to change the contrast a little bit. Brightness is not bad. Maybe add a tiny bit of saturation. 10%, 11% is good enough. Maybe bump up the black a little tiny bit. You don't want it too black because, I mean, people keep saying space is not completely black. There's always dust and gas and things out there. So leave a bit of that in there. And let's call that enough for now. I don't want to mess with things too much over here. But this is a good starting point just to give you a leg up on the rest of it. So I come back and select Develop. That finishes us out of that part, gets us back to what they call Photo Persona over here. And this is where we can apply all of our adjustment layers. In Affinity, and I believe also in the newer versions of Photoshop, it's non-destructive editing that you can do with these adjustment layers. If I add any of these effects on, I can add them on, but I can remove them and the effect goes away. You're not painting, you're not destroying this original picture. And the same for this hourglass over here. If I click on that, it brings up a bunch of different other tools that we can use, like clarity and sharpness and denoise. So for starters, I'm going to try to get rid of some of this color in the background. So what you can do is just select HSL. It's a saturation issue. We'll get the color out. If we desaturate it, the color goes away. So yeah, it gets rid of our color down here in space, but it also gets rid of the color in our jelly. But let's say okay, leave that alone. If I come over here, this is one of the cool tricks about masked, layered editing, is that you can change what part of the picture this effect applies to. So when you have a mask, if it's in white, all of that can shine through. If you select black, you're blocking that portion. No light can shine through. So what I want to do is I want to remove some of this HSL adjustment from the jelly and from this part up here, this red part. The other thing you want to check is your opacity and your flow. I usually keep them around half because I don't want to do it super dark right away. This makes it more like a paintbrush and you can paint it in gradually. So what I do, and you'll notice, I don't know if you can see, as I hover over that, there's a little bit of color shining through in that middle of that circle. So that's what's going to happen. If I paint, now I can see a bit of color. If I come over and turn the HSL off, looks like that. I turn it on, and you notice this little curve in this section. That's a little preview of the mask. Every one of these layer effects has a mask, whether you overtly ask for one or not. So if I right click here, I could say or edit the adjustment. That shows me where I drew that curve. If I wanted, I could continue editing it from here. See, now it gets darker. And guess what darker does? Darker hides that HSL, that desaturate that we applied. That hides that even more. And see, with every pass it's getting darker, and that's because I've set my opacity and my flow up here. If I set that to the max, it would be black right off the bat, but it's also easy to go too far. Click on something else, the background, it goes away. Now you can see there's even more red shining through here. But I'll just continue with editing this, and we'll paint in some red here. And again, don't be confused that it says paintbrush that we're painting. We're not actually painting red. I'm removing the ability for the HSL adjustment to adjust this part of the image. Let's bring up our flow a little bit more. Same over here. The other thing you can do is you can increase your size either up here or using the square brackets on your keyboards. Left and right square bracket changes the size of that. So there's the HSL off, on, off, on. And see, by painting over those bits, we got rid of that. Now also there's some color around this star. So I can switch back to white here. Down here you see it's black as the foreground. If I set the foreground to white, or you can just press X and it switches back. And double check up here in the color section. 255, 255, 255, that's 100% white. So white, again, in a mask is allow the filter through. So let's whiten that again. That's just some gray dust now around that star. We can also bring up some colors because there's red, green, and blue in this, but we're seeing primarily red. So I can bring up this levels control, which is obviously an important one, which is why it's number 1 on the list. So you can do a bunch of different things in here. You can just do the overall black level and white level. And you can select the different channels. Right now it's the master, that's all channels. But if I wanted to bring some more blue into this, I can select blue. You'll see that blue is way over here on the left side of our histogram. That means it's still could be stretched out a little bit more. So I will select, with blue selected, bring the white level up, which is the brightness. And that'll bring some blue in here. We could also bring in a little bit more red. And maybe a little green. And that brightened up our gas a little bit. If we didn't like that, we could again use our paintbrush and paint away some of this. But I don't find that's too big of a problem. We'll leave it like that. I also want to sharpen this up because you see some people's version of the jellyfish and there's all kinds of little squiggly lines like a brain. So let's sharpen this up. First I'm going to add some clarity, which is kind of just like an overall detail and sharpness enhancement. And then I'm also going to add an unsharp mask. Let's bring the radius up a little bit. Bring the factor, the amount of sharpening, let's bring that up. And we'll look at it off and on. Zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing here. With it off. It's subtle. Maybe bring the radius up a bit. Oh, maybe a bit too much. It's not bad. Again, Control 0 will zoom you back out to normal view. Now here's another cool trick. Again, kind of having to do with the masking. But now I've added clarity and an unsharp or sharpening factor to the whole image. And maybe you don't want that. You want it in certain areas. So I'm going to select the two of those with my shift button. You can shift click, or you can control and click one and then separate ones if you want. But in this case I want the sharpening and the clarity. I select them both. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask those two effects and then just apply it where I want. And the way to do that is you can come up to Layer, which is what this is, and invert it. And I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts for stuff that you like. So when I do want to invert a layer, I generally don't do what we're doing here now. I just do this, Control I. But for now, I'll just click it. So now if I come up and turn these on and off, there's no difference. But notice what happened? We now have a black mask, meaning that all of the unmask or unsharp mask and all of clarity has been blocked by blackness. So just like we did down here where we painted out the areas by using black to stop the HSL from messing with our color, up here we've now blackened everything, and we want to allow painting some white to allow some of this to shine through. So we'll select our paintbrush, we select white, we change our brush a little bit. So I want this to sharpen. And again, now you see a bit of whiteness appearing on our mask over here. Sharpen that. Sharpen this. And this way you can sharpen these bits of your image without sharpening all of your clouds or sharpening all these other bits that you want to look smooth. You don't want them to look sharp and edgy. You want them to be soft and pillowy. So this is a good way to do that. You select your sharpening, use the invert to mask it out, and then use your white paintbrush to paint that back in. So I want clarity and sharpness up here a little bit. Maybe there, and maybe here. Now you can go crazy in here. It's like audio mixing, which is something I also do. You never know when you're done. There's so many tools and there's so many cool things that you can do. You can go down a rabbit hole and sit here for 5 hours editing the same picture. It's probably not necessary. You probably just need a little contrast, a little color bump, a little sharpening. So for now, let's call this done. And I will come up here, say File, Export. I'm going to export it as a PNG, just like it came in. But what I generally do, so I can keep track of what's what, instead of overwriting the initial PNG, just add a little tag to the end. In my case, I put AP for Affinity Photo. So now later on, I know at a glance that this is the one that I've already edited in Affinity Photo. Now we jump back to Siril. We open that file that we just saved. So there's what we started with. And now we're going to use this instead. A little nicer, I think. First thing, we need to save it back to FITS because that's the format that Siril likes to work in. So we come up to our Save As. FITS. 32-bit is what we want. And now the only thing else we need to do is add our stars back. Image processing, star processing, star recomposition. Yes, this reminds you in case you'd been doing an edit here and you hadn't saved it. You could save. But we already have dealt with this. Now, star recomposition, it says what's your background and your star. So background is what we're just using, our starless. This is for stars, this is for starless. So starless after Affinity Photo is this one. And over here, star mask is the one file that Starnet created. Open that. Now we don't see too many stars yet because we haven't stretched them. This one is already stretched. We've already pre-stretched this side. That's why it shows up without doing anything. But the stars we have not stretched. So we stretch them over a bit. And you see they start to show up. So bring it over to where it looks good. If you bring it way over, you get overkill. Probably not what you want. And also the stars are kind of blown out a bit. Bring it back here, somewhere near the middle, let's say. Maybe a bit more. You can also mess around with these. If you bring this up, it drops it down. It's picking a middle spot to be the average point of your image, and then your stretch is based on where this point is. So you bring that up too high, and you lose your stretch. You can also mess with some of these things if you want. But let's say right around there looks pretty good. We could stretch this a bit more, it brightens it, but if you go too far, it goes crazy. But if you go up a little, it's a little brighter. Let's call that good. So I say apply for this side, apply for that side, and we're done. Now we just save it out to share as a JPEG or PNG or whatever you like. I'm going to go back to PNG again. Let's call this Jelly. Oh, my numbers, by the way, is the number of seconds stacked. This is about 20 odd hours, so that's why it's that many seconds. And I've probably done a bunch of these, so I'll call it F. At this point, you're ready to share, or, as I often do, I bring it back to Affinity. I'll open it. Go to my recents. A few different files that I made with my name on it. I'll grab this layer here. Copy. I'll paste it. I'll drag it down to here. I'll make it a little smaller. And then we're done. And there we have it. How to edit a fit file and tweak it in Affinity Photo and bring it back together with Starnet. Hope you learned something. Hope it was helpful. I didn't confuse you too much. Thanks for watching.